My Lords, the level of youth unemployment in England today is 16.2%, because so many youngsters are leaving school at 18 without any employability skills, and that is a disgrace for the fifth richest country in the world. It is also an indictment of the failure of the education policy of Conservative governments and Labour governments since the year 2000, because they have created 1 million people now at 16 to 24 who are unemployed, and that is an absolute shaming figure to do. The colleges that I've been trying to stimulate over the last 15 years, university technical colleges, has an unemployment rate of lower than 3%. 20% of our students become apprentices, 50% go to universities to study STEM subjects, and the rest get jobs locally because they've worked with the local employers for 4 years. That is what is needed. And I think that what is needed now is a revolution in education, and I think that revolution is going to be introduced by our new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, when he is appointed on Monday, because he has made many speeches on the importance of technical and practical and vocational education, many speeches. No Prime Minister from Thatcher, no Prime Minister from John Major to Simon Starmer has made any speech on technical education and practical education and learning by hand. No Prime Minister has done it. Search as you will for it, you do not find them. And the point about this is that I think he will introduce significant changes. About 2 years ago, Andy Burnham made a statement in Manchester that he wanted to scrap the EBAC, that was the academic curriculum, and replace it by MBAC. And since then, my charity and my organisation of UTCs have been working with him to find a way through, and we have found a way through. And the answer is to look at the curriculum of all secondary schools, particularly church schools and bog standard comprehensives, and make sure that you can insert into that good technical education. And you can only do it by inserting a sleeve of education. A sleeve of education from 14 to 18. And that is what Andy Burnham asked us to provide him with for the last 2 years. And a school in Manchester will open next September, will open with a sleeve. And a school is going to open this September in Barrow-on-Furness, which is the headquarters of the British Aerospace. And they cannot recruit from the schools in Cumbria students that are talented, students that are committed. And so what will happen in that particular school is that 120 students are going to join in September. 90 have already selected the technical sleeve, and 30 have selected the academic sleeve. Now, I think that that sort of pattern the Prime Minister is going to try to repeat substantially over the country. And that is something we should welcome. That is the only way we will get economic growth. It's the only way that we'll be able to reduce youth unemployment significantly. And so I think we're going to face a revolution, which is I very much welcome. The position in our country, at times you need to make great changes. I was lucky in the 1980s when great changes were necessary. I think Andy Burnham is going to be lucky because there are now great changes that have to be made. And it just does, I'm not just talking about young men. We now, in our colleges, we have many young women, particularly from the ethnic minorities, who desperately want to study engineering and computing and master that. And so I'm very optimistic. And I say, before I sit down, just one warming word to the minister who's going to reply. Could I say to her that I consider she is the only minister in the government, including the Commons, who really understands education deeply. She's really deep into it. And if there is any justice, she should be the new Secretary of State. But I don't think that the new Prime Minister will appoint Secretary of State from this House. But I hope we don't lose her, because she likes UTCs. She went to one only last week, one of the most difficult ones to reach up in the northwest of England, next to Sellafield, and she likes them. And so I hope very much she keeps her job, because she does like UTCs.
My Lords, I too congratulate the noble Baroness Evans on calling this debate, and one can sense in the interventions from all sides of the House the deep disappointment and frustration that we now have, once again, shockingly, 1 million young people NEET. And it is particularly frustrating as tackling the problem is not some deeply mysterious, intractable issue that cannot possibly be addressed. It is absolutely a solvable problem. And the noble Baroness Evans set out in her excellent speech the wider policies that are necessary in order to bring down the number of NEETs. I would like to focus, if I may, on specific policies aiming at those young people who tragically are already NEET or who may be about to become NEET. And the evidence from a range of initiatives under successive governments, including going right back into the 1980s and 90s, is it's some combination of the following. It is direct support for building up employability skills so that employers don't think it's high risk taking on someone who is NEET or about to be NEET. Plus, it's some lowering of the costs of taking them on, which can either be a general reduction or it can be specific incentives and rewards for employers taking on these people. There have been lots of initiatives over the decades. They work, but the trouble is they cost money. And they cost money partly because there's a dead weight cost. Some young people get off benefits into work anyway. The Treasury does not like these expensive schemes. So to win the argument for more of these programs, they have to be as well targeted as possible. And there is now increasing across Whitehall data from the NHS about family circumstances, from the Department for Education itself, from other government bodies, which would enable us to identify the young people at greatest risk of being NEET and for whom interventions will be most effective. But across Whitehall, what you hear, GDPR stops us sharing the data. The data is not brought together. Those 16 and 17-year-olds are tragically lost to the system. There is an initiative, the Kickstart initiative, trying to break down data barriers to pooling information across Whitehall. The Department for Education participates in this initiative, and its programme, typically, admirably, is about early years. It is identifying children who, at the age of 2.5, are at risk of turning up at school at 5, underprepared. Why doesn't the Department for Education also run a Kickstart initiative on identifying needs by pooling data from across Whitehall so that policies and programmes to help young people into work are effectively targeted and more affordable? It is just possible that these programmes will still have a cost, so we need to find a means of financing them. It is striking that the triple lock on pensions is now costing £12.6 billion a year extra in benefit expenditure than if the pension had simply been linked to earnings since 2012 when the triple lock was introduced. So if, as well as effective use of public spending through linking data, if further resource is needed, may I suggest that pension expenditure, which is the most rapidly rising and most expensive part of the total welfare benefit budget, should be where savings are found in order to tackle the problem on which all sides of the House are clearly committed.
My Lords, I congratulate the noble Lady Baroness Evans for her securing this debate and for her excellent opening speech. My Lords, Britain's economic problems did not begin with this government. That would be an unjust accusation. I'm afraid governments of all parties have laboured diligently over many years to produce today's situation. The fundamentals can be summarised in one simple set of figures. Since 2008, productivity growth has consistently fallen back. Before the financial crisis, the ONS tell us that multi-factor productivity grew at nearly 2% annually. It's now growing at about 0.5% or less and actually has recently stagnated. In 2025, per capita GDP is actually lower than that of 2022. Now, no party in government over this period can really regard this record with satisfaction. All three, and that includes the Liberal Democrats, of course, to varying degrees, regulated, taxed, subsidised, drove energy costs up and industry out. And then came COVID, Ukraine and inflation. Each inflicted genuine damage, but each also provided Whitehall with that most renewable of resources, a convenient explanation to hide bad policy. Now, there's a glimmer, perhaps, of something better. Maybe artificial intelligence is finally going to raise output per worker. And indeed, the ONS's experimental measure of productivity suggests that it's actually risen by 4.2% since 2019, rather than 2.3% under the old measure. So perhaps something is going on. But at precisely this delicate moment, the government have chosen to test whether a green shoot can survive being repeatedly struck with a Treasury shovel. The tax burden is forecast to rise to 38.5% by the end of this decade, the highest since records began. The government's planning to spend nearly half all the money in the country. The reforms to education brought in by the noble Lord Gove have been reversed out, and we know from Wales and Scotland what the result of that is likely to be. And as we've been hearing, the Employment Rights Act has undone one of this country's few remaining strengths, our flexible labour market. Unemployment is its highest level for a decade. Youth unemployment is even worse. Net zero is compounding the problem. It's zeroing one industry after another, like Denby Potteries in my own home region of Derbyshire. Denby Potteries survived the Napoleonic Wars, 2 world wars, the early 80s recession and the pandemic, but they couldn't survive Ed Miliband. And of the terrors yet in prospect under Andy Burnham, we are currently left to guess, since he refuses to face any parliamentary scrutiny until September. We know, though, because he told that pillar of our constitution, Gary Lineker, a day or two ago, that he's going to, quote, ask us for a little more. Well, maybe a wealth tax, maybe a land value tax. Certainly we're going to get municipal corporatism on a grand scale. Now, my lords, I'm at a loss, really, to know what question to ask the noble lady, the Minister, today. After all, she comes to your Lordship's chamber without knowing herself, I suspect, what's going to come next, to tell us anything about it, and yet she has to defend, as a programme for growth, an economic record of higher taxes, higher spending, riskier and more expensive jobs, a return to union-dominated schools, and among the most expensive energy in the OECD. My lords, we know that ministers want prosperity. Of course they do. The problem is they don't know how to get it. Maybe they've got lucky. After nearly 20 years of stagnation, maybe they just might have been handed the first genuine prospect of a positive productivity shock in a generation. But the problem is their instinct, faced with something that might at last grow of its own accord, is to reach for weed killer and try to convince us that it's really fertiliser. A persuasive effort, which I suggest, my lords, is most accurately described as a different kind of fertiliser altogether.
My lords, I'm very grateful to my noble friend Baroness Evans for securing this debate, and if I may say, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Fox. My lords, the government's stewardship of the economy over the past 2 years has been little short of catastrophic for our labour market. When the government took office 2 years ago, they inherited a labour market that had recovered from the pandemic, although it still bore some of its scars. And what did they do? As my noble friend Baroness Evans so powerfully explained, they immediately taxed employers for the act of hiring. Unsurprisingly, my lords, as we've heard, unemployment has risen rapidly ever since and now stands at just under 2 million, with over 1 million young people unemployed. If business had then not had enough already, the government introduced their Business-Busting Employment Rights Act, which their own impact assessment forecasts will cost employers at least £5 billion a year, with smaller businesses, of course, bearing much of the burden, further harming the prospects of the very people the government claimed to champion. My lords, noble lords opposite usually mischaracterised our arguments against the most damaging aspects of this Act as that we are somehow against workers' rights. This is absolutely not the case. The simple fact is that the most fundamental right is to have access to a job in the first place. The argument we advance is that extending rights to the moment a worker enters the building for the first time, removing the flexibility that suited both employer and worker, and making employment unaffordable leads inexorably to the fact that too many aspirant workers don't even get a day one, never mind the rights that attach. And what has been the government's response to the unemployment that they've created? A youth jobs guarantee, under which they now propose to pay employers to hire the young people those same employers can no longer afford to take on, because the government put up the employer's national insurance in the first place. My lord, she genuinely couldn't make it up. My noble friend Baroness Evans rightly called this surreal. I think she was too polite. Throughout this period, we've had nothing but confirmation of what Pat McFadden himself admitted in private, that in the Labour Party, every conversation is about who we can tax in order to pay benefits to others. That is precisely what has happened, with the benefits bill rising, and disincentives to work multiplying with it. It became so serious that the Chancellor was forced to concede before the Treasury Committee in March that her jobs tax is responsible for the rise in youth unemployment, perhaps timed with an eye to saving her own job, which looks like another fail. My lords, there was a moment of humility last week, a rare one, In the other place, the House passed a motion regretting the combination of the rise in employers' national insurance, the impact of the Employment Rights Act of 2025, and the regulations that make it harder for young people to get their first job. We now look to Mr Burnham to reverse the failed policies of the last 2 years, though nothing in his conduct so far gives us confidence that he will. Perhaps the noble Baroness the Minister could tell us exactly what Mr Burnham thinks of the government's employment-related policies so far. My Lords, in the last century, not a single Labour government left office with unemployment lower than when it arrived. Every other Labour government since, including the last two, has left it higher. Unless the government radically changes course under their new Prime Minister, that unbroken and unenviable record looks set to continue.
My Lords, can I congratulate my noble friend Baroness Evans on securing this debate and her excellent opener. We are at an end of term moment, not least because the PM who promised us in his manifesto economic growth has clearly failed, and somewhat extraordinary that the Labour Party has not found one MP in its ranks who put himself up for the job. So the mess we find ourselves in as a nation is largely due to actions and words from the current government. The noble lady, the Minister, should not underestimate the huge damage done in the early days of this government when we were misled about a £22 billion black hole. Yes, misled. Not one credible, I'm coming to this, not one credible economist supported the contention, and then not one credible economist supported that contention. I would welcome an intervention from anyone who can claim that such an economist who did support the contention. There is none. The negativity that ensued was disastrous, and I understand the tactics emulating George Osborne perhaps, but the response to break that manifesto commitment and increase in taxes killed any chance of economic recovery and, of course, jobs growth. It wasn't just the retrospective taxation, such as on IHT on pensions, but the NI increases which sent the economy and youth unemployment into a tailspin. I put down amendments to exempt charities, care homes, even hospices, where the CEO of a hospice, no Tory supporter, told me that she would have to cut jobs as a direct result, and consequently people would die in greater pain and agony than need be the case. I'm not sure that Labour were proud of that, because it was unnecessary. Even worse, the increases in NI failed. We were told it was going to raise £25 billion a year, but the OBR figures reveal that it will be nearer £16.6 billion. And I'm happy to be accused to be, as Baron Lister says, a siren voice, but all the Prime Minister and the Chancellor had to do was to stand up to their own colleagues and bring welfare back to a reasonable level, and this would have been avoided. They will now pay the price. Unfortunately, as a result of this, the cost of employing an 18 to 20-year-old rose by £4,095 between 2024 and 2026. As the former Labour Education Secretary Ruth Kelly put it, you cannot put up the cost of hiring young people and then wonder why few of them are being hired. And then, of course, the Employment Rights Act, mentioned earlier, dubbed the Unemployment Rights Act by many, has not just enforced employers to reconsider hiring new staff, it is actually forcing businesses to find ways to lay off staff and automate much faster than they had planned. And I have spoken to manufacturers, whose name I can reveal, who have done that. This cannot be what HM government expected to see. Unemployment for over 16s is now at 4.9%. Inactivity rates are 21%, according to the Excellent Jobs Foundation's recent report. This week alone, the Entrepreneurs Network, who run the APPG Entrepreneurs, of which I'm an officer, published their fourth survey. 79% of founders of businesses feel that the government does not understand their needs. Only 18% are optimistic about the year ahead for the economy as a whole. And most interestingly, 82% have a negative view of the level of taxation in the UK, and that is the point. It's not surprising when one reads the Policy Exchange study published this month, which points out that the tax burden is at a 70-year high, and the UK's tax take of 34.4% in 2024 has risen to 36% of GDP this year. That's way higher than any other successful members of G7. This situation will not improve by the incoming PM, a man with very little economic experience, talking about land taxes and wealth taxes increasing. So, the question I have for the noble lady, the Minister, is does she understand the connection between increasing the tax take, specifically on businesses, and the consequential inevitable rise on unemployment?
May I congratulate my noble friend Baroness Evans on this timely debate and her excellent remarks. It's always a pleasure as well to follow Lord Lee. My Lords, the first duty of government is the national security, including economic security of our country. And by that I mean delivering a functioning economy which creates jobs, underpins our national services and provides a safety net, welfare. It also means living within our means and protecting the right for future generations to do so. Education, employment, welfare, topics of this timely and well-chosen debate. And key to all of this is growth. Today, my Lords, I will focus my short remarks on employment and welfare. The legacy of the last 2 years of the Labour government has seen unemployment up, hirings down, a welfare bill through the roof, growth flatlining. The OBR's latest fiscal risk and sustainability report made for sombre reading, pointing out first that the fiscal problem is mainly spending-led and will likely worsen with the pressures of an ageing population, that debt is rising to unsustainable levels, the tax burden is already close to historic highs. So, on the eve of a new Prime Minister, I have a plea for Mr Burnham, that we simply cannot afford more poor policy which will only make our country worse off, less able to deliver good schools, good jobs and support those who can't support themselves. So, my Lord, what is Mr Burnham's plan for growth? Well, we hear that he wants to put taxes up, has ruled out so-called crude cuts to welfare and is sceptical about what he calls tech boosterism. His growth plan for devolution, which may or may not boost growth, I do hope it does, is a longer term, not an immediate growth plan. Yet just at the moment, this is just a moment to be getting behind tech. We have the potential to play a leading role in AI to reinforce our competitive advantage for innovation in startups, quantum and cyber, and to boost productivity we so desperately need in the NHS. And let's look at tax policy. Mr Burnham is considering bringing a capital gains tax in line with income tax, which would make us the highest rate in Europe, with less money to invest in new businesses who create jobs. As the Tony Blair Institute warned just last week, taxing our way to prosperity is both bad policy and bad politics. By hiking national insurance minimum wage for the youngest and adding regulation to working rights, Labour have hammered business, not helped them, worsening job prospects, especially for the young, as many Lords have mentioned, adding to their job struggles, as even the Resolution Foundation warned. We now have over 1 million NEETs, as many have said. 1 in 5 working-age adults on benefits and growing. Where is the balance here, my Lords? This is a tragedy our society can ill afford. And let us remember what our commitment is, to help people who can't and support those who can back to work. And if you don't want to listen to me, listen to your own advisers. Alan Milburn, who speaks devastatingly the silence of the unheard voice of young people applying for jobs, or Lord Timms, who warns that PIPs are due to double by 2030 and must be addressed, or even Charlie Mayhew, who tries to tackle sickness at work. We need urgently to reassess and rebalance. So I would ask the Minister and to urge the new Prime Minister that he has a strategy for growth and the bravery to address some of these very difficult issues in our country, getting behind businesses and entrepreneurs, incentivising work, getting young people a foot in life and tackling the tragic
Today's House of Lords debate ended
bill.
the parliamentary term with sharp disagreements over Britain's economy, employment and the priorities facing the next government. Peers from across the chamber debated youth unemployment, productivity, education reform, taxation and Labour's economic approach. Some argued that Britain needs major investment in technical education and vocational skills to tackle long-term unemployment and boost economic growth. Others criticised the government's employment policies, tax decisions and business regulation, arguing these measures risk making it harder for companies to create jobs and for young people to enter the workforce. Several speakers also looked ahead to the expected arrival of Andy Burnham as Prime Minister, expressing very different expectations about the direction he might take. Supporters suggested new leadership could bring fresh ideas on education and economic reform, while critics questioned whether higher public spending and additional taxation would improve Britain's long-term prosperity. For millions of families watching across the country, these arguments are not just about politics. They are about whether young people can find secure employment, whether businesses feel confident enough to invest and hire, and whether living standards can improve after years of economic uncertainty. Every decision taken in Westminster ultimately affects workers, employers, pensioners and future generations. As Parliament now breaks for the summer, today's exchanges leave one question hanging over British politics. Can the next government deliver the economic growth that voters have been promised? What do you think? Should Britain's next Prime Minister prioritise higher public investment, or should reducing taxes and supporting businesses come first? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth coverage of the biggest debates from the House of Lords and the House of Commons, please like this video, subscribe to Britain Daily, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest political developments from Westminster.